This is Sports 225.
It doesn't get any better for me than talking to Tim Brando, who is wearing his Wyoming sweatshirt, because that's what I wanted to start with. A couple of weeks ago, you called your first game at Wyoming. For all I know, you'd never even been to Wyoming before, so much as the University of Wyoming.
No, I had not. I had not been to Wyoming. And the only other state that I've not been to is South Dakota. So I've been to North Dakota, but not South Dakota. So that was a huge bucket lister for me. Not even getting to the Kurt Gowdy part, which, as you know, means a hell of a lot to me. And then getting to go to his state park that was named after him. I called his son, Kurt Jr., letting him know I was doing the game. And, he was watching very closely because it's a place near and dear to him. He married a young lady, Kurt Jr., married a young lady that was Wyoming's junior miss in 1974. So they were all watching. And it meant a lot to me that the Gowdy family was. So Kurt just retired. Kurt Jr. just retired from SNY, a network in New York, cable entity that's carried the Mets for many, many years, and along with the Yes Network is very, very big in Gotham City. So it was huge for me to get to do the game and get to pay homage to my mentor from a broadcasting standpoint, who was the great Kurt Gowdy.
Right, because you got to that, because there are a lot of people watching us, Tim, who have no idea who he was. And Kurt Gowdy was a Wyoming guy who was one of the great fly fishermen, believe it or not, of all time, but became one of the great announcers in the early days of color television, if you will.
Yeah.
It was just legendary for the things that he did. He covered every sport. He was an affable guy with one of those friendly kind of voices, and everybody knew him. I personally never met him, but I never heard a bad word about Kurt Gowdy.
Well, Lee, I met him in 1982, and the story is one that's really close to my heart, because I would never have met him had it not been for a couple of things. Number one, I worked for a man named Bob Earl, who owned the radio station WIBR in Baton Rouge, and in 1979 allowed me to do Baton Rouge's first ever sports talk show between 6 and 7 o'clock. And it was, as I like to tell people, the first job I really needed to keep, because I'd just gotten married and we had just moved, my wife Terry and myself, to Baton Rouge. And I was basically doing an afternoon DJ gig, playing music. But I wanted to be a sportscaster, and this was my way of conning my way into a sportscasting job. I told Mr. Earl before going on the air, I said, I'd really love it if you would allow me to do some play-by-play of high school football and to have a sports talk show at night. Now, remember, AM radio back in those days would lose. You would go from 50,000 watts during the day to 5,000 watts.
Plus, it was that little tiny, like that little tiny station over in Port Allen, right?
Yes, right. That's the station. Yeah, right on the. I wish I could remember the state highway number, but it's like, I think it was -3 something. Right as you're going towards Lobdell, coming off of Highway 90. It's like you go over a little viaduct, and then there's a little turn to the left, and it's still there. The actual building is still there, and you can see where the old sign was. It's molded now, WIBR there. But that was in the era of mom and pop radio shows, radio stations that were, we didn't have these conglomerates that were owning radio stations like we do now. And Bob Earl was one of a gazillion independent radio station owners. And he was big in the little theater in Baton Rouge. His son, Steve, is still in Baton Rouge, and I hear from Steve occasionally. He was a big, big part of the little theater in Baton Rouge. So he was fashioned himself as sort of a Hollywood hot dog. And he knew my dad from his past in entertainment and in radio and television in Baton Rouge. But Mr. Earl said, well, kid, if you want to do a sports show, if you can go out and sell it, I'd be more than happy to have you do it. And I said, well, I'll do that. And together with his son, Steve, they went out and got some advertisers for the show. And I did too. I hyped the show as much as I could. And I also did a high school football game of the week. Kent Lowe was my color analyst and my stats guy.
Oh
He was in grad school at LSU at the time.
Kent Lowe being the longtime LSU basketball
SID. Yeah.
Yep.
And we would take what we call a Marty unit out to Memorial Stadium one week, Olympia Field the next week, wherever the games were involving teams like Tara and Broadmoor. We went out to Plaquemine one week to do a game. We did a Halloween game, and I would always have a guest analyst with me. One week I had J.C. Polich, the guy that called the Billy Cannon Run. We did that Halloween weekend, okay? Jerry Stovall came and did a game with me in 1979 when LSU had an open date. It was we had all kinds of fun doing that, and I won the Louisiana Association of Broadcasters Play-by-Play Award then, and through Mr. Earl, Lee, I was able to get to Kurt Gowdy. Mr. Earl loved my play-by-play work. He said, "Kid, you're going to be a star. You're really good at this. I know Kurt Gowdy, and we have meetings with Kurt annually every year, independent station owners. I'm going to take your cassette to me, and I'm going to give it to Mr. Gowdy." And I was like, "What?" I said, "He's my hero, Mr. Earl. I named my little brother Kurt after Kurt Gowdy." He said, "No, you didn't." I said, "Yeah, I did." So he went and took my cassette tapes of high school football to Kurt Gowdy, who owned stations in West Palm Beach, in Massachusetts, where he lived, just outside the Boston area. He owned like 8 or 9 radio stations. And Bob Earl was close to him, and he took the tapes, left them with him. And then now fast forward 3 years to 1982. I had left WIBR, and I'd gone to WGSO in New Orleans.
I'm giving you the timeout for 1 second because I got this. We only have 4 hours to finish this half-hour show, Tim. I love busting on Tim.
Okay, no problem. Yeah.
We're gonna take this break and pick this back up right there because it's awesome. Yeah. He's Tim Brando, a legend and the Fox Sports football broadcaster, which is how all this started for me doing a game in Wyoming. But we're so far over. Let me take this break and pick this story back where we left off. I'm Lee Feinstein, Sports 225.
Rec parks have a purpose. They contribute to community revitalization and safer neighborhoods. They entice folks to get out there, promoting health and well-being. There are green spaces that help sustain natural ecosystems and buffer flooding. Parks help children learn, promote the arts and cultural programs. They drive tourism, economic development, and enhance property values. So take your pick. BRAC, your #1 park system in the nation.
Back on Sports 225, catching up on some fascinating radio history here in Baton Rouge with Tim Brando. I didn't know we'd go in this direction, but it's great. But he's getting to the part where he's getting to meet legendary broadcaster Kurt Gowdy. So pick it up from there.
So I left WIBR in 1980, and Mr. Earl was just great to me, and he was trying to get me on Channel 9 even then, but Tommy Gibbons didn't have an opening. I keep talking to Tommy Gibbons over at Channel 9. I can't get him to hire you because he doesn't have any openings. he said, but listen, if you get an opportunity to go to a bigger market, you need to go. So I said, okay, I'm going to take this job to replace Wayne Mack at WGSO in New Orleans. They had the Saints games. And if you remember, Wayne did the Saints games up until the time WWL got the rights. So I'm replacing Wayne Mack, and I'm doing a nightly sports talk show in New Orleans now. And I get a call from ABC Radio. I was the sports director at WGSO. And I get a call from a lady with ABC Radio asking me if I could have Kurt Gowdy on my radio show in New Orleans the week of the Final Four. He was going to be in New Orleans to work the games with Kaywood Ledford on the NCAA radio network on CBS, old Westwood One. And I was like, You mean here? He's coming here. She said, yeah. So, oh, yeah, I'll make room for Kurt Gowdy. she had no idea of my history or the story. I just knew, okay, he's coming to town. He's going to be on my show. So I hoped and prayed that he remembered me from the tapes that Mr. Earl had given him a year earlier, and he did. And so I had him on the show. He did a full hour on a Friday night before the Saturday semifinals of the 1982 Final Four.
That's the Michael Jordan
Yeah.
shot from North Carolina.
Yeah, right. And of course, I was credentialed for that Final Four, as I had been credentialed because of Inside LSU Basketball in Philadelphia the year before when Dale went for the first time. And so we had a lot to talk about. And by this time now, in 1982, as you know, I had already started doing Tiger Vision college basketball with Jordy Holtberg. So I had about tapes of about 13 or 14 basketball games on television to show Mr. Gowdy. Okay. So I'm thrilled, and I'm going to get to see him. And he remembered me, yes. And we started talking. I started telling him some of this story about my past and naming my brother after him because of the Catholic family. And then, oh, by the way, child that was going to be 11 years my junior. And our parents allowed me to name the baby if it were a boy. My sister would have named the child had it been a girl. And I named him Kurt after Kurt Gowdy. Well, I put him on the phone with his namesake after the interview. And Kurt kind of teared up. He really was taken aback emotionally. And so we get through with the conversation with my little brother after I'd done the interview with him. And he said, you know, kid, I want to have you over for breakfast tomorrow morning. Can you get over to the Hyatt Regency, say 8:00? And I'm like, oh yeah, absolutely, I can get there.
I won't even go to sleep.
I'm credentialed to go to the games, so I'll just go early, right? So I drove in from Kenner, where I lived, out near the airport, in Chateau Estates area there, and parked at the Dome and went into the Hyatt, and we proceeded to have a 3.5-hour breakfast, he and I. And he just, Lee, you know me well, and it's very rare that I am not the dominant talker at breakfast or any other occasion. But on this particular morning, I did all the listening. I just listened to Mr. Gowdy, and it was incredible. The pearls of wisdom he bestowed upon me. And he helped me make a lot of decisions, like staying where I was. Don't take a big job. He says, I know you're doing TV now. I've got these tapes. I'm going to look at them. He said, but you need to stay where you are, because if you get a chance to go on television, and I was about to take a job at Channel 9, they were offering me a job now, and they were going to allow me to go out and do games as well as work at Channel 9 with Jay Townsend. And he said, if they're going to allow you to do that, you need to stay right where you are until the opportunity to call play-by-play comes up. He says, this cable thing, this ESPN thing, it's going to be big. It's going to be huge. It's going to change the business. So you wait your turn, stay put in the Baton Rouge, New Orleans area, and you're going to be fine. That's exactly what I did. And of course, I left in 1985, late 85, 86, and went to Bristol from Baton Rouge. And his advice was just incredible. It was phenomenal. And he was like a godsend to me, because I could have made a lot of mistakes and not gotten where I wanted to go if I had not had him to bounce things off of. And you know what, Lee? I had breakfast with him at every Final Four I attended from 1982 all the way until he stopped coming, which was his health started to take a turn for the worse in the late 90s. He would always come, even if he wasn't working on the radio. He was doing the emceeing for the NABC Champions Luncheon, which is, by the way, something I do now for the National Association of Basketball Coaches. And he was an All-America Hall of Fame basketball player at Wyoming, a point guard for them. And he was also a Hall of Fame tennis player. He's in the tennis and the college basketball Hall of Fames for his athletic endeavors, okay, to go along with being, just a great broadcaster. So that's my love affair with Kurt. And, you know how I feel about Dale Brown. The only other person that's in the same realm with Dale for me in terms of mentorship is Kurt. And that's because he was the guy I wanted to emulate from the time I knew what television sportscasting was.
That's fascinating. See, talking to Timmy B, you never know what you're going to get. And I sure as hell didn't think I was going to get that. But that was two segments that are gold, Tim, that when you eventually slow down and write the book,
Yeah.
you'll already have it here. You'll be able to find it on the YouTube.
There you go.
Your transition from WAFB to ESPN ties right into the next segment. He's Tim Brando. I'm Lee Feinswag. It's Sports 225.
Brec parks have a purpose. They contribute to community revitalization and safer neighborhoods. They entice folks to get out there, promoting health and well-being. There are green spaces that help sustain natural ecosystems and buffer flooding. Parks help children learn, promote the arts and cultural programs. They drive tourism, economic development, and enhance property values. So take your pick. Brec, your #1 park system in the nation.
We're not talking about current football affairs yet, and we might not. Tim Brando. He's my guest this week. He's up in Shreveport. I'm, of course, in Baton Rouge. If you missed the first two segments, we talked a lot about Tim going to Wyoming for the first time, but also the affiliation with Kurt Gowdy, the legendary sportscaster. And for those of you who don't know, well, you got to watch the replay. But Tim early in his career went to work at WAFB, which gave him incredible freedom, and he hooked up with ESPN in the early days. And I repeat the joke. Remember, I used to say you'd do, canoe fighting on ice skates if it required it, whatever.
Yeah.
But when you left WAFB and went to ESPN, everything changed. All the time, though, except for one stint in there, Steve Schneider was there, the sports director who retired last week.
Right.
Steve was so instrumental for you too, because he gave you the freedom, if you will.
Yeah.
And of course, Steve's a legend in my mind for just, sustaining in this market for so long.
Yeah, absolutely. And, he and I have spoken. We spoke when the decision he made was made, and I applaud him for handling it the way he did. Local television is not what it was. Nothing is in our business any longer. But Steve was a giver. He was one of the great givers of our time.
Yep.
So many young broadcasters' careers from the Baton Rouge area spawned, and I'm talking about people that moved on to regional networks, national networks. Young women especially have done very well coming from the Manship School of Broadcasting there in Baton Rouge and getting internships under Steve. When I met him, he and Jim Inkster were calling the LSU football games on their campus radio station. And I liked them both. I really did. They were polar opposites of one another in terms of their personalities, but really good guys. Steve was sort of an aw shucks kid from Mississippi that really didn't know how good he could be. And I tried to instill in him a level of confidence to know that he had the capability to do whatever he wanted to do on the air. Steve actually could have been a network producer. I mean, his ability to organize and communicate, but tell stories and know how to put the pictures with the words was his greatest strength. But I also thought, and this is selfish, of course, if I could find a way to get Steve into Channel 9 as our third guy with Jay Townsend and me, that, it would make it a lot easier for me to go into Carlton Cremines, our news director, and say, hey, I've done my stories. It's all done. Steve's got this. He's good to go. Well, Steve did Superfan with me, the old syndicated show with Goober Morse and Harold Hertham that we had done. An old salesman who turned producer, Chip Blanchard, no longer with us now, had this show concept, and he put it together. And I was sort of hosting this show in 81 and 82. And by 83, when I was hired at Channel 9, I thought to myself, man, let's get Steve in here, and he can be our Saints reporter on the show. So he got on Channel 9 by virtue of me opening the door for him to be our Saints reporter for the Superfan show. And that was in 82. So by 83, which was 40 years ago, I convinced Carlton Cremines we really did need a third guy. And Jay was all in. So we hired Steve to be our third sportscaster, which I believe was the first time the market ever had 3 guys doing sports. And you're right. Selfishly, it gave me the freedom to do what I needed to do and not have to worry or feel guilty about leaving to go call a boxing match, or I used to say Australian rules PKA bowling, or whatever they wanted me to do at ESPN at the time. And that's how he started his career at Channel 9. And once Che had retired and left, moved out to Las Vegas, and I had taken a full-time job in '86 and moved to Connecticut, it became Steve's domain. And his work there was legendary. He kept Channel 9 atop the ratings as the #1 station, in my opinion, in Baton Rouge, because of the sports, the serious nature that was given every night to sports coverage. Because in Baton Rouge, as you know, Lee, especially from, say, Friday through the weekend, the #1 story is LSU and Southern. Whatever's going on at LSU and Southern are the 2 major stories. So they would need more time to devote to sports on weekends, and he knew that. He came up with the idea of the Sports Line Friday night, the high school show. I'm going to tell you right now, I had no interest in dealing with high school football. Those were just headaches. Parents calling you saying, "Why wasn't my kid's touchdown on?" Steve embraced all that. He wanted to make Channel 9 the ultimate local station for sports, and he did. He absolutely did.
Yeah, this has been a treasure trove of history stuff, because you and I have talked about some of this stuff over the years, but never consecutively like this. Those are 2 great stories. He's Tim Brando. We have just a little bit of time left, and as soon as we get back, we'll wrap this up on Sports 225.
Rec parks have a purpose. They contribute to community revitalization and safer neighborhoods. They entice folks to get out there, promoting health and well-being. There are green spaces that help sustain natural ecosystems and buffer flooding. Parks help children learn, promote the arts and cultural programs. They drive tourism, economic development, and enhance property values. So take your pick. BRAC, your #1 park system in the nation.
Very little time left on this Sports 225. Remember, no more sports225.com. Tim, the website just died, so you got to go to social media, Facebook and Twitter, and see what's up. Tim Brando with me with just this remaining minute. Trip to Wyoming. Cool place to watch football?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I highly recommend it to anybody. Got to go.
You had 3 games basically in about 9 days.
Yeah, I did. We did 2 last week. That Houston game that was won on a Hail Mary at the last play of the game, 2 touchdowns within 12 seconds of each other with West Virginia and Houston. This week we go back to Houston to do Texas. The Longhorns, the Mighty Horns, have to come to town as a lovely parting gift before they go to the SEC.
Yeah, their first and only Big 12 meeting.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, on the spot, who wins the national championship?
Oh, that's tough. You know what? I'm going to say Michigan gets it done this year. The Wolverines win the national championship.
That's awesome. Where do you go this week?
Texas and Houston.
Wait,
on
there you
Saturday.
Go. Just said.
On Fox at 3:00 your time. Tune in. Don't miss it.
That's what happens when you host a show. You're thinking of the questions ahead. You don't listen to what somebody just said, and we just talk about that.
And LSU will beat Bama. I'll tell you that now. LSU beats Bama.
Making that pick
Saturday. Yeah, I am. Tennessee might beat them this week. Alabama's not that good, Lee. They're not.
You are a treasure trove, Tim. This was awesome. The stories about Wyoming, Kurt Gowdy, your brother, radio stuff in Baton Rouge, talking about Steve Schneider and putting up with me once again. This is always great when we can get together. Thank you again for doing this, and thank you to everyone for watching Sports 225. Thanks, Tim.
You bet. Thank you, Lee.
At carnival time by Baton Rouge Bay, that's the site of my story. At Spanish Town Mardi Gras, things can get blurry. See the mowers marching